Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there. Welcome to this week's episode. And I want to talk about alexithymia. So if you have ever heard of alexithymia, I would love for you to post that in the comments. Have you worked with children or adults who have alexithymia? What were some of the diagnoses that you had for children who struggled with alexithymia? Today's episode, I really want to talk about recognizing alexithymia in regard to conditions that might contribute to or put children at risk for developing it in adulthood. And so I'm going to talk about a recent study that I came across and what it has to say about alexithymia and trauma and adults and children. So if you're joining me live today, I would love to know who's here. Post your name in the comments, post where you're from, what population you work with, and let's get started. So I'm Cathi Spooner. I go live every week on my social media platforms, in my Facebook group that's called Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground, and my YouTube channel. And I also simultaneously stream into Instagram and talk about all things play therapy and expressive arts. So if you're interested, if you're a play therapist or you're interested in learning more about play therapy and what it is and developing more of an understanding of using play therapy, then I invite you to join me every week. You can watch all the replays on my social media platforms. It's probably easiest to find them on my YouTube channel, which is Renewing Hearts Training, Cathi Spooner, or in my Facebook group, Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. If you are on Facebook and you're a play therapist working with children, adolescents, and families, you may be interested in my Facebook group. If so, hop over there and join the group. You do have to answer all the questions, though, in order to get access in the group. So first and foremost, what the heck is alexithymia? And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's a big, fancy scientific word. I actually came across this term several years ago when I was doing some research on trauma in children and looking to see what the research said about trauma in children. And one of the terms that I came across regularly once I kind of got down all my rabbit holes is alexithymia. And so I was kind of curious what this was. And so I did a little more digging. And it has to do with an inability to identify emotions and to articulate. So say what your emotions are. And think about this. If you're a play therapist, how often are you identifying and labeling emotions? If you use dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, one of the key skills in DBT is mindfulness of emotions so that you can recognize your emotions and allow that information to help you better understand what's going on. And so how many of you have had clients, young clients, adult clients sitting across the room from you, or you're in a play therapy session and you're you're going through emotions and you're labeling emotions, and your client just kind of looks at you like, I got nothing. I have no idea what you're talking about. It might be that your client has alexithymia. It might be that they are not feeling safe yet to open up and engage with you in the play therapy session, or if you're working with adolescents or adults in your session. And it might be that your clients are struggling with alexithymia. And one of the things that the experts attribute to alexithymia, and one of the kind of reasons we want to be aware of this diagnosis is, or this condition, is that it can, the experts, and I don't know about you, but I've kind of seen this as well, where the experts will say that it can negatively influence social relationships and even more intimate, like family or romantic or close friendships, can impact relationships because people who struggle with alexithymia may miss social cues. They may not know how to identify their emotions or the emotions of others, or understand what's going on around emotions in the interactions. And so one of the things we also want to think about is if we're working with children and adolescents and we're using play therapy, then one of the things that we are typically doing is identifying and labeling emotions. I know this is one of the things I typically focus on when I'm working with children who've experienced trauma, or they have anxiety or depression, anger, any of these things, because we can use that information to recognize what's going on and then identify what kind of coping skills might be needed, and teaching our clients some coping skills if we're using more of an integrated play therapy approach, or depending on what your play therapy modality is, that might be something you're going to be doing in your play therapy sessions. And if your clients have trouble with emotion regulation, this is most definitely one of the things that we focus on in play therapy, is recognizing emotions and labeling them to help understand what's going on. And so what happens if you're sitting across the room and you have a client and they just can't? And I don't know about you, but I have had those clients where they just can't go there. I would say the vast majority of my clients, we do eventually get there, but on occasion, there are clients that this is a huge struggle for them. So if they can't identify their emotions, then how are they going to use that information to help them figure out what's bothering them? And how do you use that information to figure out what coping skills they need, or what strategies, or how do they ask for what they need? All of those things. And so alexithymia is really important to understand when you are in the mental health field working with clients. So that brings me to the research, because I always like to make sure that I'm staying up to date on what is in the literature and what's working, or maybe better understanding something a little bit more. And so there was some research that was done recently out of Stanford University, and they collaborated with some researchers at the Hebrew University. I'm looking at my notes. I don't have them up there. Have my article here. The Stanford University, and they collaborated with some researchers at Hebrew University and Adam Mickiewicz University. I hope I pronounced that right. And in this study, this research study, what they did is they looked at 78 published sources about alexithymia, and in the total number of participants in these studies was 36,141 participants. So if you're familiar with research, that's a lot of people, which means you can you can look at a lot of different data points and you can see how it might generalizable across, I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean, across different populations. 36,141 participants. And they explored the link between childhood emotional neglect and physical abuse and adult alexithymia. And using what they found out from this study is childhood experiences of emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and physical neglect are high predictors for alexithymia in adulthood. And one of the things I thought this was really important is because, one, we kind of know there's a link, some correlation between alexithymia and trauma. And typically, I think most of the time we focus on physical abuse and sexual abuse, and we don't necessarily focus on neglect or emotional abuse, which means then we're not really fully helping clients understand the connection there. And the thing is, most people know physical abuse is harmful. Most people know sexual abuse is harmful. And so your clients are going to recognize, yeah, these things are harmful. Children don't necessarily recognize emotional abuse or emotional neglect or physical neglect. And so they're not necessarily going to understand that these things have created some harmful effects for me as well. These things have negatively impacted me. They're not necessarily going to understand that connection. And one of the things that I've found in my work with children, adolescents, families, and adults over the last 30 years, and working with a lot of clients who've experienced trauma, is really understanding the impact and feeling safe and overcoming some of those negative impacts by recognizing how it influences my everyday life. And emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and physical neglect, I think those of us in the mental health field, we recognize that these are harmful, and our clients don't always recognize they're harmful. And one of the things that we may not necessarily connect is my client's inability to recognize and label their own emotions might actually not be that they don't feel safe with me. In the session, it might be, and it's probably part of that as well. And they might have this condition, which means if they have it, then there's a much more intentional approach to help our clients begin to label their emotions, recognize how those emotions feel in their body. One of the things that I think of, and this is the thing that it kind of brought up for me, it made me think about, so I'd be curious what your thoughts are about this. So if I look at this from an attachment and neuroscience lens, one of the things that I know is if I'm not feeling safe, then my body will recognize that and my brain will activate things to help me feel safe. And if I don't, it's my perception of safety as well as the reality of safety. And so I'm either going to go in fight, flight, or freeze mode, so to speak. I'm going to activate my, as Stephen Porges calls them, my neuroception circuit. Well, my neuroception circuits are always engaged to assess threat. And if I'm assessing threat, then I'm going to go into that safety mode, which means I don't necessarily need to focus on other aspects that I can focus on if I feel safe. And one of those things is I find this all the time, is when my clients, children, adults, adolescents have experienced trauma, a lot of times what they do is they kind of disconnect from their body, and they're not necessarily aware of what's going on in their body. And we know from neuroscience that we want to engage that whole body to help clients learn to recognize what's going on and use that information to help them navigate their day-to-day life. And so the other thing we know about neuroscience and attachment theory is that I need to feel safe with others, and I need to be able to read the cues of what's going on, read cues of safety, read cues of threat. If I have this trauma and neglect and abuse history, then I may not read those accurately, and I may really just kind of disconnect and not really learn how to do that. And so the physical abuse and the sexual abuse, those I think we readily recognize. Emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and physical neglect are not ones that our clients are probably readily gonna recognize as harmful, and looking at the ways that it's impacted them, including kind of shutting down and disconnecting from the body, that they're not really recognizing how they experience those emotions in their body. What does that information mean? And one of the things that we also know from a lot of the research, as well as practical experience in the field, is that oftentimes the people perpetrating the emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and physical neglect are caregivers. So think about that from an attachment standpoint, where these are your caregivers and you're learning to how to be in relationship, how to survive with your caregivers. Then these are your caregivers, and children aren't necessarily going to recognize and understand emotional neglect as much as they may recognize physical abuse, or they may know that emotional abuse doesn't feel good and it makes me sad. A lot of times children will blame themselves, and it'll get in their mind that, oh, if my parent says it's my fault, it must be my fault. That's a hard thing for kids to really understand the difference. And so a lot of the work that we do when we're working with children and adolescents who have experienced trauma, or maybe they come to us with a trauma history, is making sure to assess for any physical neglect, or assess for emotional neglect, or assess for emotional abuse. And this is that it's really important to get this information when you begin the treatment process, like that first session, when you're gathering information about what's been going on and you're gathering that history. You want to gather this information so that you can start to assess for the possibility that these issues might have occurred, and your client may be experiencing alexithymia. And if we can address that in play therapy early, then we can help children in adulthood kind of minimize some of those effects. I just realized I have not been doing my little fancy banner. So if you're watching me on LinkedIn, my YouTube channel, and my Facebook group, you'll see I have these fancy little banners that I use because I live stream every week from using StreamYard. If you're on Instagram, StreamYard won't let me stream into Instagram, so you won't see my fancy little banners. But so the connection between alexithymia and childhood neglect and abuse is something you want to assess for when you're gathering that initial information. So that brings me to the third thing that I wanted to talk about, which is, as play therapists, as child and adolescent therapists, how can play therapy help? And play therapy can be your early intervention that can reduce some of the long-term negative impacts. So we can never change what happened. We can never change that abuse occurred. We can never change that neglect occurred. Those things cannot be changed. And the reality is, we as play therapists have the opportunity to help our clients. I call it taking the sting out of it, taking the negative impact to help children thrive in adulthood. And if we can help children early, then we can disrupt that link that they found between a childhood neglect, emotional abuse, and physical neglect in adulthood. We can begin to intervene to help children learn how to connect to their bodies and recognize those emotions, label those emotions, help them understand what's going on even in their bodies. So like if they're old enough and maybe they're early adolescents or even adults, then we can help them understand what's going on. And that in and of itself, I think, can be helpful, because children often, how many of us think, oh, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, I'm not like other people. All of those cognitive distortions that keep them from thriving in their lives. We have the ability as play therapists, as child and adolescent therapists, to intervene early to disrupt and change some of those negative things that happen and change the impact. So we can teach them using play therapy and expressive arts activities. We can teach them how to recognize emotions. We can teach them what emotions are. We can label emotions, and we can begin to help them explore through play therapy activities that don't necessarily have to be always engage their cognitive components of their brain or the ability to label and tell you what they are. We can use play therapy and expressive arts activities as another way for communication, that they can communicate and understand and begin to connect more effectively with what's going on internally for them. So we can use that to help them identify what are their emotional needs, what is it that they're working through, exploring some of those cognitive distortions about what's going on, and really empowering them to get a healthy sense of being, that healthy self-concept, who I am, and that healthy sense of belonging, creating that sense of safety and connection and attachment by being able to explore some of these if we can intervene early. So that is it for today. I noticed there's a lot of quiet. There is not a lot of comments today. And I'm thinking because it has a lot to do with it's a big fancy term. It's kind of a lot to take in. I remember it took me a little while to kind of read through and understand this funny term. And I do think it's important to understand it. So that's why every once in a while, I like to go through and see what the research says and kind of explore that. Sherry says, hey, Sherry, how are you? Sherry says, this has been very helpful. I'm glad. It is a lot to take in, though, but I really feel like it's not something we really talk about in the play therapy arena. And so understanding this is really important. I haven't found over the last 30 years in mental health that I've had a ton of clients outside of clients who are autistic. Back in the day, we would have said Asperger's syndrome. They tend to have difficulty with alexithymia as just part of the condition, and in trauma. So Sherry says, I have an adult who I want to play with now, and I think this will help him. That's awesome. I often use play therapy and expressive arts. I often used expressive arts with my adult clients who've experienced trauma. And so that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely think that would be helpful as a way to get around some of the blocks that come up for adults. So let me just do a recap. So, first and foremost, alexithymia is a condition that creates an inability to identify and articulate emotions, not only for themselves, but it also impacts the ability to read social cues and really understand emotions within the context of social interactions and within relationships. And so the recent research that was done using a meta-analysis method discovered a strong link between childhood emotional abuse, childhood emotional neglect, and physical neglect as strong predictors of alexithymia into adulthood. And it provides really valuable information because we can use this to help recognize alexithymia in our clients, in our adult, adolescent, and child clients who, especially if they've experienced trauma. And if they've experienced trauma, maybe physical abuse or sexual abuse, the likelihood they've also experienced physical neglect or emotional abuse. I find that one happens a lot, emotional abuse and even emotional neglect. If you think about parents who are just kind of not available, maybe growing up, early experiences in homes where their caregivers were had an addiction and weren't emotionally available for their child, or kind of gone a lot because of their addiction, or maybe a serious mental illness that prevented that early secure attachment bonding, then I would definitely consider that the impact of that. And so the research really gives us good information to help us know what to look for when we're doing that early assessment at that very first session, making sure to ask questions about some of these experiences. And then the third thing is, how can play therapy be helpful? Well, in play therapy, we can use the opportunity for early intervention for children, even adolescents, to help them connect with emotions and label and identify and recognize those emotions. Because you've asked those questions at your first appointment. You will have asked parents, depending on the age of the child, you will have asked the child some questions to explore those things. And really understanding and knowing what you're looking for can also help not misdiagnose, especially in adults. They might have alexithymia. It might not just be that they're refusing, or you have an adolescent who just, no matter how many times you've asked in the most compassionate and creative way, they might just be struggling. It might to identify what those emotions are. It might not be that they're refusing. It might not be that they're denying anything or being defiant. It might just be that they don't know. And so having that information and knowing these things as a play therapist, as a child and adolescent therapist, will give you more tools, so to speak, to better understand how to help your client. And we can use play therapy activities and expressive arts activities to provide other ways of exploring and processing emotions that don't require them to verbally connect with those cognitive areas of their brain and tell you what they are. They can show you through expression. They can show you through activities that can explore different emotions in the playroom. And it opens up a lot more opportunities and avenues for that healing to occur. So that is it for today. And if you're interested, I have a training coming up. It's called Play Therapy for Traumatized Children and Teens. I like using a neuroscience and attachment lens when I'm working with trauma, because I find that having that information about what the research says and what we know in the field of trauma, and if it's childhood trauma, that developmental trauma, then we also know we're looking at attachment. But if it's trauma, we also know that we're looking at attachment and how does that get handled for the child to help with that healing process. So that's why I like using that neuroscience and attachment lens in the beginning, helps with that case conceptualization to understand exactly what it is that's going on for each of your clients to better understand how that traumatic experience has impacted them. And then using that information to help guide you through each stage of the play therapy treatment process so you know what kind of interventions to use for each stage of the change process in play therapy. So we do a lot of group interaction. We do a lot of activity so that you walk away from the training having some things that you can use right away with your clients. So if you're interested in that, you want to pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com/courses. So go on the courses page and you will see play therapy with traumatized children and teens. If you're also interested in maybe you also need supervision, also consultation, I do have an online play therapy consultation program that includes twice a month group consultation meetings. So you get not only my 30 years of experience in working with children and adolescents in the mental health field, you also get the collective brilliance of the other group members to better understand what's going on with your clients. So we do case presentation and discuss some case conceptualization, what's going on, so you know what kind of strategies to use, helping you overcome your imposter syndrome and feeling like you don't know what you're doing. The group is amazing. We have a great group of people, and just the support you get and knowing you're not alone in your imposter syndrome, but walking away with more confidence that you know what you're doing and you feel like you can make more of an impact with your clients is amazing, because that's why we get into the profession. We want to make a difference. We want to help children heal. So Play Therapy Academy is the program that I have to help you do that. It's online. Included in Play Therapy Academy are also some online courses that'll give you a really strong foundation using play therapy. So if you're interested in that, then you can also hop over to my website, rhplaytherapytraining.com, click on the supervision page, and you'll see some information about Play Therapy Academy. If you're interested in Play Therapy Academy, you can click on the link on that website. Then you can schedule a free 30-minute video call with me, and we'll talk about how play therapy can be helpful to you to make sure it's a good fit for you. And I can tell you more about it then. So that is it for this week. And I will see you next week. Bye. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.